What's up, everybody? I'm Billy Ryan, and you are listening to the No One Is Watching podcast, where we explore leadership, culture, and the impact they have on high-performing teams. We can all admire the championships that are won on the field and the big profits that show up on the balance sheet. But this show is dedicated to the premise that those battles are won long before they start. Through conversations with elite performers and leaders in the world of business, sports, and life in general, we'll learn valuable lessons on how you can optimize yourself and your organization. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Miller, Chief Operating Officer of the Minnesota Vikings. In addition to discussing Andrew's unique experience as an executive in both the NFL and MLB, we touch on the roles listening, vulnerability, and empowerment play in leadership. We also talk about how cool it is to hear that horn blow and the skull chant before Vikings games. Well, Andrew, thanks for joining today, man. I'm excited to catch up. It's been a little while.
Absolutely. It's great to see you, Billy.
Great to see you as well. So, did you grow up? I know you went to college in California. Did you grow up on the West Coast?
I grew up in Southern California, in Riverside, California.
Okay, so you grew up in Southern California, and then stops have included, I believe, Northwestern, Toronto, Cleveland, and now Minnesota. So you're not a fan of the sunshine and the warmth, right? You've escaped it and are never going back.
Yeah, I'm working on almost 20 years of winter at this point. And I have adjusted. I actually got asked about that this morning of how I've adjusted. And you know what? I think each place is different. We've loved Chicago, Cleveland, Toronto, and now Minnesota. And I think the thing I've learned about the winter is even as cold as Minnesota can get, you can put on more layers and keep enjoying being outside. But when it's hot, when it's desert hot in Southern California or Phoenix or somewhere, it's really hard to escape it.
Yeah, there's only so many clothes you can legally take off. So, yeah, I hear you. I did a stint in Phoenix and we loved it, but yeah, I mean they say it's a dry heat, but so's an oven, so it's pretty steamy.
Yeah.
So how are you? I tell you what, I did I think I've only been in Minnesota once, and it was in the summer, but it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You enjoying your time there?
Absolutely. Minnesota is absolutely incredible place to live. And, people who we knew here, some of whom we'd overlapped in Cleveland or Chicago or other places, essentially told us, if you liked Cleveland, the neighborhoods, the schools, the pace of life, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, we live in Minneapolis, is very similar. It's just twice as big. And, Chicago, Toronto, places like that. It has all the big city things that those places have. It's just not as big, and it's sort of the perfect happy medium. It's a great place to raise a family, a great place to live.
Yeah. So tell me about your role now, COO of the Vikings. You're overseeing obviously the entire business operations side of the house. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Vikings, and that means I oversee the business operations of the team. Not too dissimilar from the roles I had in Toronto most recently, where I was EVP of Business Operations at the Blue Jays. So for most sports teams, there's some split between the sports operations, whether it's baseball operations, football operations, basketball operations, and that's a lot that goes into the team side, scouting, which you obviously did, player development, contract negotiations, again, which I know you have experience in. Everything that puts the team on the field is more on the sport operation, and the business operations are things that are more commonly associated with other businesses, things like finance and HR and sales and marketing and IT, and those types of functions are pretty common in the business operations of sports teams.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to a few other folks about just the lack of awareness, like the general public, or when they think of the Minnesota Vikings or the Cleveland Indians, they think of, the players in uniform on the field and sort of what they can see on TV and don't really recognize or can appreciate the massive machine and the amount of people that are working behind the scenes to make that organization run every day. And so you're one of the few guys that I've known personally that has been on both sides of that ledger, right? You started on the baseball operations side of things and then eventually migrated over to more of the business side. Was that something that was intentional on your end, or did it just sort of happen?
Well, my goal, I grew up in Southern California, like I said, and always loved sports, loved playing sports, soccer, baseball, basketball. Was fortunate to walk on to the Cal baseball team as a left-handed pitcher. So, sports, but especially baseball, was always something I was really passionate about. I'd always wanted to, once I realized I couldn't play baseball professionally, I wanted to figure out a way to work in the game. And, I took a detour when I graduated from Berkeley. I ended up going to Wall Street and working for 6 or 7 years in investment banking and venture capital. And ultimately, went through the dot-com boom and the bust, and found my way to Northwestern for grad school, where I did a JD MBA there. And my idea was not to get into sports at that time. My idea was that I really needed to go back to grad school. I was at a point in my career where it was important for me to round out my education, to end up, probably more likely in a more established, firm or industry, either back in California in technology or private equity, which I had a little bit of background in. It was my first year of law school that I really started thinking about sports, and in particular baseball. Moneyball, the book, had come out. I read it. I realized that when I was interning for the Oakland A's in college, that was literally happening down the hallway from me, and I didn't know. And it painted a very different picture than what I had seen in one semester, a day a week, in their front offices. And I just thought, maybe the world's changed in 6 or 7 years, and it's either an industry I'm going to be more interested in, or my background's a better fit for, and that I would really enjoy. And I had 3 years, and at that point, it felt like a lifetime where I didn't need a job for 3 years. And so it didn't seem like much of a risk to explore and to talk to people in the game and to learn what people's roles were. And I definitely, as you said, I gravitated towards the baseball operations side. I want to be a general manager. I wanted to run, baseball operations. And I was really fortunate. I got hired by Mark Shapiro, Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, in the Cleveland, now Guardians front office, as an intern between my second and third year of Northwestern. Really focused on salary arbitration and things tied to the major league team contract negotiations and valuation of player contracts. And I loved it. They brought me back full time after I graduated in '07. And that was the dream. I was in the absolute perfect place. You and I overlapped in Cleveland. It was the right people, place, culture, leadership. It was something that I would have wanted to be focused on, whether it was in sports or law or consulting or private equity or some other firm. That Mark and Chris and Mike and Derek Falvey and Ross Atkins and all the great people that we got to work with just made it a special place. And so once I got there, I was really enjoying my work, enjoying being in baseball operations, and really had no interest in switching to the business side. So, when, you asked the question of, was that intentional? It really wasn't. I was happy with what I was doing. I was focused on continuing to grow and, frankly, continuing to help us, try and win. And Mark Shapiro started his transition to team president. And, when he was going to become team president, he was going to oversee business operations and baseball operations, which wasn't too common at the time. And, his vision was that if we operated our business, using the same types of core principles and values and focus areas as our baseball operations, it gave us even better chance to win in a small market like Cleveland. So, at first, he asked me to consider switching over to the business side with him, and it was an extremely difficult decision for me because I was in the exact type of role I wanted to be in, and very well situated for continued growth, and didn't really know where the business side would take me. So ultimately, I switched for two reasons. One, as you said, almost no one gets to work on both sides of the industry. It's very rare. I didn't really know many other people who had done that. So I just thought, this is an industry I'm very passionate about. I'm very interested about. I'll learn something that will be unique, and I don't know where that will take me, but it'll be interesting. And then second, and much more important, we were such a talented front office on the baseball side of things. All the people I mentioned, some other people, David Stearns, who I know you've had on this show, and Carter Hawkins, now the GM of the Cubs, and Neil Huntington was there with us at first, and became the Pirates GM. Like really, really talented group of people, and I just thought, not that I wasn't contributing, and not that we weren't improving in baseball operations, but I thought maybe if my goal is to win the World Series, I could have more of an impact by helping transform the business side. So that's really why I switched.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, it was an impressive roster of folks that they had in Cleveland at the time, and in a similar journey for me. When we crossed paths, I was there as an area scout, living in Atlanta, and had an opportunity to go to the commissioner's office from there. And on paper, it's like the no-brainer, right career move decision. And I agonized over it for all the reasons you just talked about, the people that were there and the culture. And and Scott Barnsby, who was my cross checker at the time, who's still there as the scouting director now. I was wearing him out, just calling him like every other day, trying to work through it on my end, because I shared the same sentiment. Really appreciated the environment that I was in, that the culture that had been created, the investment that they had showed in their people, and look, I was an area scout who had very sporadic sort of face-to-face time with the group that you just mentioned, but it was palpable to me too. But that awareness on your end to sort of take a step back and say, I want to win, and this may be a different way for me to do it. That's interesting. That's cool to hear.
Baseball, and this was part of Mark's vision, but as especially in your roles, Cleveland, Atlanta, Arizona, but especially the commissioner's office, right? The baseball economics are really structured where, the majority of revenue is local and there's no salary cap. So, teams that are in smaller markets, you need to find creative ways to have competitive advantages. And, that when you think about something like, Moneyball, which is, become such a, kind of popular item, from the movie and the book, that was a lot about finding those competitive advantages on the baseball side of things, player contracts and evaluating statistically, players. But, from a business standpoint, it's also important to find those advantages and find ways to engage fans and, build your brand and have people want to spend their time, around your team, focusing on the games and the content. And all that does, eventually, is create incremental revenue for the team to use towards the players. And so if you're looking to find advantages to win, you need to find them in every facet of your organization.
Yeah, it's a great example of sort of embracing the chair that you're in at the time, and maximizing your contributions there, because that's one that myself included, when you get in, I know a very narrow view of what I wanted to do and what roles I wanted to be in eventually. And so probably to my own detriment, honestly, it narrowed my path so much. So to be able to, obviously you gained that in your time and sort of getting that perspective on it once you saw how it all operated. But yeah, I mean, small market clubs in particular, it's such an important thing to be able to tie the business and the baseball side, or baseball, business and player side of the operations. It's not unique to baseball. It's maybe just a little bit more palpable because of the lack of a salary cap. So you talked about all of that big part of the funnel winding up as revenue to direct toward players, right? Because at the end of the day, the game is about the players, and that's what's by and large going to determine the wins and the losses. And so I know that we chatted a few weeks back that the Vikings recently were sort of recognized as the number one organization in the NFL as far as the NFLPA player satisfaction report. I know that's something you're proud of, and it's a pretty big deal. I don't think people can probably appreciate how important that is in the era of salary cap, in the era of free agency, in the era of players getting some say over where they want to play and when they want to play their times. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for you personally, for the organization, and kind of the process that led to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we're extremely proud of at the Vikings, that the NFL Players Association conducted a survey on a number of different facets of player experience, and we ended up getting the top grade in the league. And frankly, A's across the board in all the facets. So it's something we're extremely proud of. And as you know, culture matters a lot. And it's really starts from the top. Our ownership group, the Wilfs, are absolutely incredible owners, and it's a testament to the investments they've made in resources, facilities, staffing, equipment, technology, all the things that go into providing that, atmosphere and that environment for players. And most particularly, hiring people that care deeply about providing players the experience that they need to be positive. And, it takes a lot to win in sports. And, having an environment where players feel like they can come in and be positive and get the work in that they need to do to prepare to be out on the field, healthy and ready to go on Sundays, or in baseball, 162 games. That makes a difference. And for us, it's a testament to people across the organization in many, many different roles, whether it's athletic trainers, strength and conditioning, football coaching, communications team, a number of people that are involved day in and day out with players that make it a special place to work.
Did you directly solicit any feedback from players, or was it more crowdsourcing from a lot of those staff members you just touched on and their experiences?
Yeah, I mean, so the survey was conducted by the Players Association, so that even more of a testament that this wasn't, a self-directed employee engagement survey that we ran or that the NFL ran, right? This is something that the players themselves, conducted, and it turned out that they were positive. So,
So
we
sorry,
got.
I meant more the your process in creating that kind of culture, right? And the steps that you were taking and prioritizing certain initiatives or what have you. Was there in order obviously to get to that ranking, was there player feedback or suggestions on things that matter to them that you stressed across the organization?
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we're also at a different juncture because, a year ago we hired a new general manager in Kwesi Adolfo Mensa, and a new head coach in Kevin O'Connell, and brought in, almost entirely new coaching staff, some new people in, high performance and athletic training. And so there's actually quite a number of new people, meshed with a lot of really talented, experienced, veteran people here from the Vikings. So, definitely got some player feedback along the way. But I think a lot of the focus for us is on culture and on the values that we want to uphold, that we want to represent as an organization, and making sure that we're looking for that in our hiring process, in performance reviews, and how we're conducting our day-to-day operations. That culture is a lot about the behavior you accept and the behavior you don't accept. And so making sure that when we are thinking about who's in our building, that every single person matters to what we're trying to achieve, and that we're all trying to uphold those values.
It's funny. I literally defined culture the exact same way just like 2 days ago, and somebody was when I was talking to me about it, because it's a little bit of a nebulous term. It can get kind of tossed around and I think watered down because it gets overused. But the good ones are palpable, and when you're a part of a good one. You also know when you're part of a toxic one or a lacking one. But how do you go about assessing for that across the whole organization? Because you're hiring somebody in a junior sales role versus hiring someone on the high performance team that's going to be interacting directly with the players every day. They're coming from two very different worlds, but all have to fit within sort of that cultural paradigm that you've prioritized. How do you go about doing that at the Vikings?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a year ago when we hired Kwesi and Kevin, we were at an inflection point, right? I mean, you've been a part of teams that have been very good and won, and teams that have been, not as good, and didn't win as much. And, when you're not winning, it's really tough, and it can become negative. And, we were at a point where we had missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. We made a change with our head coach and general manager, and that's always a really difficult time, as you know. A lot of people, are understandably anxious when there's leadership change, because it can mean change across a number of different roles within an organization. We were also at a pretty low point, from an internal morale standpoint. COVID had been a long grind. From an organizational perspective, 2020 we had no fans in our building. We were mostly separated. To adhere to NFL protocols and make sure that we're all staying healthy and safe. But our business operations team had been working remotely for most of 2 years, even coming into games and coming in when absolutely necessary to the building. But we were pretty strict in terms of the number of people that could be in the building. We share a space. All of our football and business operations are together. So in addition to kind of where we were from a team perspective, our building had lost that connection, I think, with each other to some extent, which I think is pretty natural if you haven't really spent a lot of time together over a 2-year period. So all the things that people love about working in sports, and the passion and the energy and the excitement and the adrenaline, you were kind of losing in some of that over the course of that time. So we were at a pretty low point. And, I think when we hired Kwesi and Kevin, we decided to take a step back and say, this is the time for us to reassess who we want to be as an organization, what we're trying to achieve, what's our mission, why are we here, who do we want to be? And so we went through an organization-wide process of redeveloping our mission and values over a number of months. It was very collaborative. Every single person in the organization had an opportunity to weigh in, whether it was in focus groups or surveys or providing just direct feedback. And so when we put those values on the board, when we say that our mission is to advance the Vikings legacy through the passion and pursuit of excellence, that every single one of us has bought into these are the words that we're going to try and uphold. From a more like tactical standpoint, that can come in the hiring process. We're literally interviewing people right before I got on this podcast with you, conducting interviews, and we're looking at if we have 5 values that we're trying to uphold, right? We're trying to put the team first. We're trying to seek to learn. We're trying to commit to an environment that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive. We're trying to uphold and exhibit high character. And we're trying to strive to achieve. Ultimately, we want to win. If those are the 5 things that matter to our values, well, how do we assess those in an interview process? How do we ensure that we're each upholding them every day? And how do we make sure that that comes out in the way we engage with our fans, our players, our clients, and any other stakeholders that we have?
Yeah, it's. I imagine the feedback you got and the buy-in you got from your staff across the entire organization was obviously shaped by COVID, and I would imagine you probably got some more substantive engagement because of COVID. I mean, we're all in our houses with a lot more time in our hands, a lot more introspection, a lot more reflection, and you start realizing what is important to you. And by and large, people that work in sports want to be part of a team. They want to compete. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And when that, to your point, when it's taken away from you and it's like sort of this sterile, you could be working anywhere, like for any type of organization at that point, it kind of felt different. I'm sure it energized people. I'm sure they were excited to get back in there and wanted it to kind of have some contribution to the direction. But
yeah,
setting it is one thing, right? Setting that path and the culture, assessing for it's totally different. I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard hiring people in any walk of life, in any industry. And I a little biased, but I do think that folks that work, particularly someone like you who has been on the player evaluation, team side of the operations and now we're on the business side, you have a unique lens through which to assess people and evaluate whether they're cultural fits. And you can hire a resume, that's easy, but you have no clue whether that person fits sort of what you're looking for as a human being. And that the sweet spot for me is finding that, seeking those people out, but then almost getting them, assessing for whether they're buying into what you're saying or they're just interviewing for a job because they want to work for the Vikings, irrespective of what your culture and your values are. Right? That's hard to sort of figure out, and it's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah, we work in an industry that people are interested in working in. So it's not usually a lack of interest or a lack of resumes that come through. It's about selecting and what your process is for selecting the right people for those roles. And anytime you hire for almost any position, you're looking for functional expertise. Does the person have the background, experiences, ability to perform the role? And then once you have that, then the question becomes, what are the characteristics they bring to the organization? And there's a set of characteristics that would probably make someone more likely to be successful in almost any role, any industry. And those are things like, curiosity and adaptability and communication skills and selflessness, hard work, dependability, things that allow people to take in information. The world's always changing, right? We talked about COVID a little bit, right? That's the extreme, right? But the world's changing outside of that, and it's been changing, and it will be changing. And so, for any of us to assume that we can just adhere to the status quo without adapting is not going to lead to much success. So, we need to look for people who are able to understand changes and adapt to them, and frankly work and collaborate in a team environment. Sports by definition has tended to be a team environment, but the business world is similar, and it's still team centered. And we see people who have been athletes at high levels, they're professionally or in college or at different high levels of amateur sports. They tend to have a lot of characteristics that make them successful in the business world as well.
Yeah, no doubt. It's funny, we're sitting here talking a lot about sort of culture and the soft skills and things like that, and you're like the prototypical Moneyball guy who came from venture capital investment banking before you got in baseball, right? So you walk in on day one with that sort of stamp on your forehead, but obviously you're passionate about the cultural side, the human element side of life, not just sports and business. But have you always gravitated toward that, or is that something that Cleveland helped shape in you? Because I know that's something that they prioritize as well.
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland definitely helped shape that, and a lot of what I would attribute my leadership philosophy style really starts from a long tenure with Mark Shapiro, both in Cleveland and Toronto. Absolutely incredible leader and mentor. Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, Derek Falvey. I mean, their approach, in Cleveland when I got there, Mike, Chris, and Mark was different. It was different than I had seen from other teams I had been a part of, other organizations. I was fortunate. I loved the jobs I had, prior to grad school, and worked with great people. They were thinking about things differently in terms of culture and leadership. Every single day, we were thinking about how can we continue to improve our culture? How can we get better as an organization? Our mission in Toronto was get better every day. That was the mission. And so it was a constant thought of how can we continue to improve, and how can we think about people and culture. And I think that has really helped shape how I think about organizations and culture, and what's really important. And a lot of that starts with people, and it starts with obsessing about hiring and developing people, developing culture, and empowering people. And the things that I learned from Mark over the years really drove that. And his whole approach is and was about obsessing about hiring talented people and then empowering them to do what they do well. and that leads to diversity. It leads to diversity of thought, and it really is empowering to people to have a voice in really important decisions that we made.
Yeah, it's ironic that you touched on Moneyball earlier, and for a while it was sort of misconstrued as like it's about on base percentage and this and that, and it's really, when you look at it from like through a business lens, it's about optimizing and leveraging underutilized assets, right, in one way, shape, or form. And the ultimate irony is that yourself fall into this category. There's other organizations that have really embraced this. The ultimate underutilized asset, and I don't like using that word, but it's people. And having Mark's philosophy about obsessing over hiring talented people and then developing them and empowering them, whether that's guys in uniform or in the office, the ripple effect of that and sort of the long term. That organization is a great example of it. You touched on a lot of the guys that have gone on to leadership roles in other organizations. So sort of the cascading effect of that is hard to quantify, but it's hugely impactful.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the NFLPA survey we were talking about, right? The Wilfs as owners, it's a very similar philosophy. You know, obsess about hiring people and then empower them. They're not micromanaging. They're involved. They're engaged. They care, and they want us to be a world class organization in every facet. And it's the same type of mentality of a culture really revolves around the people that you have and the beliefs and the core values that you uphold.
Yeah, and it's so hard to accomplish that without strong leadership at the top, right? And obviously that starts with ownership in the sporting space, and it's easy to focus on sort of the quantifiable results, but sometimes, and I think it's human nature, right? We overvalue what we can quantify, and I was always sort of obsessed with that on the human element side of it. I didn't know enough about the human performance side personally. I didn't, I had a degree in psychology, but I was far from qualified to be assessing people at that level. But it just felt like it was a huge opportunity. And you've gone on and you've seen organizations that people throw around culture, and it's hard sometimes, they hard to maybe define that, but we tend to focus on successful organizations, and most of them have a pretty good culture, have pretty good leadership. There are always exceptions here or there, but by and large, it's like it's there's different paths to get there, but everybody gets there that's going to have the success that we're all striving for.
Yeah, I mean, culture is tested through adversity, and whether that's an extremely challenging for the entire world, a pandemic like COVID, or from a team standpoint in sports, losing games, that's where you test your culture, and strong cultures can bounce back and can overcome that adversity, and a lot of that starts with trusting relationships and respect, and people knowing that everyone around them cares about each other as people and wants to win. And when things turn negative and people start pointing fingers, or people start focusing on themselves, right? That's where cultures that aren't as strong really don't overcome that adversity together.
Yeah, you obviously have. Actually, as we're sitting here talking, I thought of one other guy that has a similar profile to you, making the leap from MLB to the NFL, and Paul DePodesta. And so, all the stuff we've talked about here is applicable to not just all of sports, but all of life, as far as leadership and culture and things like that. But were there some eye-opening moments for you when you made that leap to the NFL? Were there things that you were completely ignorant to, or just sort of caught you off guard when you first got there?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people have asked me, so I spent 14 seasons in baseball between Cleveland and Toronto. I just finished my fourth season in Minnesota with the Vikings. And it's sort of like, speaking languages, right? If you speak Spanish fluently and then you see something in Italian or French, maybe it seems similar, but it's not the same language. So there's a lot of terminology that seems similar, and, collective bargaining agreement, and different rules and things that you sort of understand the mechanisms of them, but you don't understand the language of the terminology. From a business standpoint, it's probably a lot more similar than from a football versus baseball standpoint. because you're still in the business of selling tickets and sponsorships and suites and engaging people, through your brand. There's differences, and the most obvious one is, pretty simple. It's going to sound funny when I say it, but the number of games matters. And in baseball, with 162 games, from a business standpoint, a lot of your focus is on ticket sales, because in Toronto, as an example, we had 4 million tickets to sell. We had 81 games times nearly 50,000 seats. 4 million tickets is a lot of tickets to sell. And
Yeah, it
so,
is.
my first 2 years in Toronto, we led the American League in attendance. That was 3.2, 3.4 million tickets sold. Well, that means that 20% of your building is empty. It's not as simple as 20% every day. I mean, roughly half of our games were sold out, and half of our games, by definition, were lower demand because they weren't sold out. So your business challenge is, how do you sell more tickets to the lower demand games without pulling fans away from the higher demand games, right? You're sort of optimizing across 162 games. In the NFL, we have, including our preseason game or games, we have 10 games, 10 home games, and 67,000 seats. So we have 670,000 tickets to sell. It's a lot different equation, for us, that, we're fortunate. We're in a sport that's really highly demanded, our very passionate fan base. But, we have a lot fewer tickets to sell. So that's not really the same kind of focus, day in and day out as baseball was.
Yeah, yeah. There's the novelty, for lack of a better term, of football. It's only once a week, right? I mean, that's why it's part of, in my opinion, what has made the NFL such a juggernaut. Is look, I'm a baseball traditionalist, and I can sit there and watch a third and fourth place team in August, and just enjoy it for 3 hours. But I'm in the minority. In the NFL, you've got one game a week. There's a lot of bells and whistles, and there's a lot of good things going on. And it's a very different sell from the business perspective, obviously, than it is sitting there for 81, signing up for 81 home games and all that entails. So I was wondering if that's what you were going to say, as simple as number of games, because that would have been my guess. But it's a huge difference. It's 10 times fewer games, really, when you think about it, 81 versus 8 plus preseason, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, moving to the NFL has been fun. Our fan base, Vikings fans, are truly passionate. U.S. Bank Stadium is one of the best stadiums in all of sports, and the atmosphere in our stadium, in U.S. Bank Stadium, on Sunday afternoons is absolutely unreal. It's really unique. Our internal team has done an incredible job of creating what we call showtime. The 15 minutes leading into kickoff, and the skull chant, and the Galler horn, and
I love the horn, man. The horn's
yeah,
amazing.
it's a lot of fun. And every Sunday in our stadium is a full out production. And the only thing that I've seen equivalent is, in Toronto, we had all the big concerts come through, and U2 and Metallica and Taylor Swift and Guns N' Roses and Coldplay and Beyonce, and every Sunday is like a U2 concert. It's absolutely unreal, and it's a lot of fun.
That's incredible. What's been the biggest, the thing you've leaned on the most over the transition from baseball to football, when you came in a new role, in a obviously a very impactful leadership role in a new organization, a new sport, in a new town? What was your priority on day one? What did you want to sort of hang your hat on?
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate because I went through a similar transition from Cleveland to Toronto, and sort of coming into a new role, new organization. In that case, new country, new city. The only team in Major League Baseball that represents an entire country. And so coming into Minnesota, I had some experience having done it once, and the goal was to start out by meeting people. I mean, I had roughly 50 one-on-one meetings in my first month. Went to the cafeteria here and sat with a different group of people every single day, and tried to get to know as many people as possible. And not, what's your resume and what projects are you working on, but tell me about where you're from and your family and your background, and what you love doing, and just trying to understand the fabric of what has made this organization great over 60 plus years, and what makes this community tick. And if I had walked in to a new organization, Toronto or Minnesota, and said, I got the answer, here's the playbook, let's go run it, that's not going to work, because each of those markets are different. Each of the teams are different. Each of the histories are different. Each of the communities are different. Each of the fan bases are different. And so for me, I need to walk in as this is a learning opportunity for me. Instead of me in some way trying to impose my will or something on this organization. The idea is for me to learn and to try and understand where the opportunities are and what has made the culture great and what has made this place historically great, and how to build off of that.
Yeah, actually, as you're sitting there talking, I don't know if you'll have the perspective on this that you may have had in other roles, but I don't know too many folks who have worked in both sports. And one thing coming from the player operations side of the house that I've always been envious of when it comes to team building of football is the concept of building a roster around your system, right? And so there are some organizations that have been very, very successful over the years doing that, and others have struggled to find the right players for their system, or maybe they just have the wrong system. I know you're not involved in sort of the on-field product in Minnesota, but have you noticed that? Has that jumped out at you at all as far as the difference in team building and approach?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not nearly as involved, on the football side of things, but it is a difference that I had to sort of learn in that language, difference, in terms of scheme and preparation, and I've gotten a great appreciation for it because it is very different. Baseball is very pitcher, hitter, one-on-one matchup, and football is very 11 on 11 matchup, and it's complex, and so a lot goes into the game planning and the schemes and how players fit those schemes. Again, that's probably about the extent of even my expertise in talking about it, but
Sure.
it is very different and it's very fun to see.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's parallels there between what you were just talking about coming into the role that you're in, right? And team building and building around strengths and figuring out who is on your team, the human beings that you're dealing with. And that's that human element is it's kind of like the first thing that some people sort of forsake because they're so focused on the tactical side of things, and whether it's roster building or executing whatever initiative they're focused on. But I know it's something that you focus on in your leadership style. And I read recently that you sort of came out and talked about struggles that you've had with depression in the past, and that I'd like to hear a little bit sort of about what that experience was like for you, because I feel like it starts with, for me, it starts with humility when it comes to leadership, and that vulnerability that, yeah, you know what, I've got my problems too. And it immediately sort of diffuses any imaginary schism or wall that may exist between you and sort of your organization by saying, yeah, look, Andrew's dealing with stuff just like we all are.
Yeah, I think empathy and vulnerability is really important for a leader. It's not something in any way that I had planned for. There wasn't some grand scheme or strategy of, now is when I'm going to disclose that I've had mental health
Hit the
challenges.
empathy button.
Yeah,
Right.
and make people feel related to me. But when COVID hit, we were all struggling, right?
Yeah.
And none of us had ever experienced anything like that in our lifetimes. Hopefully, we'll never experience anything again like that in our lifetimes. But those first few weeks, especially, was really challenging. Everyone was struggling to figure out what it meant and what was going to happen, and had concerns, anxieties about family members and health and jobs and a lot of other things. And to make matters worse, everyone was isolated. The focus was on being distant from each other, and that's not as normal in our society. And as humans, we crave that interaction with other people. And so people were really put in a place that was different and challenged in many different ways, with how to proceed. And we have monthly all staff meetings, and we moved very quickly to monthly remote all staff meetings on Teams and Zoom. But people were telling me that we're having quite a bit of challenge with staff members and mental health, and people are disclosing that they're struggling and having a tough time, and so I was told coming into our April of 2020 staff meeting, hey, just so this is something that's really critical for you to reference in some way, that you understand that people are struggling, and and to remind people of the mental health resources we have, because it is something that we prioritize as an organization. We have resources available to players, coaches, staff members. Everybody has access to mental health resources, and so I was just given the advice of, hey, just make sure you mention it and make sure you reference our resources. And as I was thinking about the best way to do that and the best way to tell people that not only I cared but that I understood, was to tell people I've gone through depression. And I literally didn't know, as I kind of got on that call, whether I was really going to do that or not. And I didn't go into great detail. I just told people, I said, hey, I understand. I understand that people are struggling. I can't really put myself in your shoes as to what those struggles are right now, but you need to know that I've had mental health challenges in the past. I've suffered from depression throughout most of my life, and it's come and gone, and it's been really challenging at times. And I understand that it's important to get the help that you need. And that was, from my recollection, that was about all that I said. And a lot of people came forward and thanked me for that. And a whole other group of people just told me that they were struggling with similar things, or told me about their mental health struggles. And since then, we as an organization, Lindsay Young, one of our writers within VEN, Vikings Entertainment Network, she created a series called Getting Open, which was intended on breaking the stigma of mental health and doing interviews with players and coaches and Vikings alumni and other Vikings community members in their relationship with mental health, either their struggles or struggles of family members. And so I got interviewed for that, and talked about my mental health challenges in more detail. So I think it's really important that it's something that, as leaders, empathy, vulnerability, like we said, is really important. In this way, I could tell people that I may not have had exactly what they're going through, but I've had similar types of challenges in my life. And it's okay to tell other people. It's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to not be all right, and to go get the help that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. When COVID first hit and the world got flipped upside down and, kind of stood still at the same time, one thought I started ruminating on was kind of what you're touching on there. The fact that there are people that, people in leadership positions who pre-COVID could sort of get by on just like the sheer force of their personality, or the sort of the kinetic energy of the beehive of the office, and people feed off that, myself included. And when COVID hit, and you go from your all staff meeting in person to your all staff meeting on Zoom, it's a very different dynamic. You can't create that human connection. And one thought that I had, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, was that it forced leaders. It probably, vetted some folks out of leadership roles, I would imagine, but it also it forced some people to be much more intentional about their leadership. You no longer had the luxury of popping into my office and just hanging out for 15 minutes and having a cup of coffee and building rapport and getting a little bit of work done and what have you. You had to, set a 30-minute window for me to sit down at my computer and have a virtual meeting with you. It's very, very different. It's a very different challenge as a leader. What was that like for you? What approach did you take?
That was a challenge as a leader, because when you're in an office, a lot of the time you can have informal interactions. You can walk down a hall and run into somebody. You can see someone in the cafeteria, getting coffee or something else. It's really informal, right? I can check in with you, ask you how you're doing, see what's going on in some project. And it doesn't have to be an intentional appointment that we set. And as you said on Zoom or Teams, it was, and that made it really hard, right? Because I might not necessarily, plan to reach out to you in that moment. And hey, if you see my name coming up on Zoom, maybe it's different than if we just kind of see each other in the hallway and say hello. And
Right.
so that made it really challenging to try and have other ways to connect to people. We did some informal coffee chats where we just paired people up and did, a 15-minute, get together, or other types of things. But it did make it really hard as a leader. And I think the other thing to maybe pivot a little bit is, leadership, a lot of it's about being authentic. And, whether it's the mental health example, or this example with remote versus in person leadership, I'm pretty introverted. And I've learned that about myself over the years. And I literally used to have to put on my calendar, go walk the second floor in Cleveland, because I'd sit in my office all day and be fine behind a spreadsheet and emails. And
Yeah.
I knew that as a leader, I need to be out walking around and connecting with people and building those relationships and having the informal interactions, and I needed to schedule time for it. And so as an introvert, I'm not going to gravitate towards big groups, and I do it, and I do it as part of my job, but it's not sort of the natural setting for me. And so as a leader, self-awareness is important, authenticity is important. I have to be who I am, and lead in my style. And I've been really fortunate. I've been around some absolutely incredible world-class leaders. A lot of the names that we've already mentioned, Kevin Warren, who was here as chief operating officer before me, and we've had a good relationship since then. Kevin's very different than me. He's larger than life. He's charismatic. He's outgoing. When I got here, people said, "Hey, don't try and be Kevin," and I said, "I'm not." I know that, just even in a short instance of getting to know him, he's an absolutely incredible leader who I'm going to try and learn from and incorporate, his strengths. But I can't be him. And if I try and be him, then people are going to see right through that, and it's not going to work out well for me. Same with Mark Shapiro, right? Mark's an incredible leader, and he's got a different style than me. And I need to learn from that and take that, and make it my own, and be my own leader.
Yeah, we try to. It's an easy trap to fall into where you are around great leaders, and so you try to mimic them. You try to do what they do, right? And it comes off as inauthentic immediately. People sniff through it right away. So I totally agree. I mean, it's one of the first words I talk about when we discuss leadership is authenticity. But what you touched on, that authenticity and the self-awareness of I'm an introvert, that's not my style, but I know I need to put myself out there to the point where and it's so counter nature to what I would normally do that I'm going to schedule time on my calendar to go force myself to walk the second hall. That's, that's a pretty unique combination, I think, of sort of humility, authenticity, but also like pushing yourself outside your comfort zone because you know you need to, because you know that you need to sort of have that tool in your tool belt, even if it's not, your go-to.
Yeah, I mean, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone is really where we all learn and grow, right? That is growth mindset. And that's something that, as I look back in my career, we started this conversation. You asked me about my move from baseball ops to business ops. When I look back on that decision, the decision to go to Toronto instead of staying in Cleveland, the decision to come here and move into football, I think every one of those decisions, the common thread was it was outside my comfort zone. And, I knew the decision to go to Toronto, that was as far outside my comfort zone as it could be. Just, new country, new city, all those things. But it was also growth. I was overseeing a team of 5 people or so, and I was moving to overseeing the entire business side, which is about 200 staff members. And that's a huge growth from a leadership perspective, and way, way outside my comfort zone. Same thing coming here and moving to the NFL and moving to a totally new sport and industry, a new market again. And so when I look back on those decisions, they were not easy decisions, and I agonized over them at the time. But I think the common thread of being outside my comfort zone and having a great learning opportunity in the process, really, I wouldn't go back and change any of them.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, if you embrace that philosophy in life, you're probably going to look back and be happy. In your twilight years, you're probably not going to regret taking opportunities like that and taking chances. And even if you fail, right? Even if it doesn't work out, if you push yourself too far, the benefit there is now I know what my limit is. I know what I can't do. So there's value there too. Andrew, look, I know you are a busy man, so I appreciate you taking the time. It was really good to catch up. I'm going to have to get up there and blow the Viking horn or something at some point. That thing's awesome.
You're welcome anytime. It'd be awesome to show you around US Bank Stadium.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for taking the time, and look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the No One Is Watching podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe to be notified of future episodes. If you'd like to support the show, please take a second, leave a rating and review, or share it with your friends. If you're interested in similar content, you can check out my website at nooneiswatching.com, where you can subscribe to the newsletter, read my blog, or follow me on your social media platform of choice. Look, your time is valuable, so thank you for lending me some of it. We'll see you next time.